Hey, I'm Mikey Microphone, and the microphone is a metaphor for the fact that you have something beautiful to say, but you need to make the arrangements so that you can be heard. Tonight, I am working on my editing tools for the uh, book editor that is part of wayswemage.com. If you know someone who would like to write a book on this platform, have them contact me and we can get you squared away. I've been refactoring these links. Promote means that you can reorder the chapters in a section. Delay means you move the paragraph into the following section. And then the sections themselves also have promote, edit, and remove links, which we'll be refactoring shortly. But first, what I'm going to do is complete the suite of tools for paragraphs by redoing the edit button. And the edit link is the one that was originally constructed with the help of div with data. So there's this script. Okay, so the edit link, it is carrying a few IDs actually. Book ID, chapter ID, edition ID, and section ID. Oh, it's the append. Append is the link that uses div with data. Okay, how fascinating. All right, well, let's go about refactoring edit. And then we'll see if this div with data stuff is still useful or if we're going to refactor that to rely upon the new tools that we've built up around the table of content model. You can review these. You can see these here. These are the things that we built in the last 2 or 3 videos. So looking at the paragraphs controller, edit is here and update is here. So edit is basically passing these IDs through to the form which is rendered. The form is rendered with those IDs because they get passed into this query. So thinking about how we can do without this query is kind of our starting point. So we know, okay, so table of contents, that's plural. Okay, so that is plural. That is grabbing everything in that paragraph, including the citations. Table of contents dot each get applied to the new paragraph that's created. So how does this paragraph end up in the book? Where is the table of content that assigns this paragraph to the book? Oh, so those table of contents are simply being, okay, they're simply being updated with the new paragraph ID. Okay, so this is a logical way to establish this group of content because it is a group, at least in the case when there are citations for the paragraph. So what I would have to do if I wanted to replace it with, if I wanted to replace all these IDs with a single ID is just start with that table of content and then get its children. So I think that still makes sense because it is easier to generalize and use in multiple controllers, as we discussed. So we have last child here. Let's go for children. Get all children. And probably what we can do is grab this query, and then we can actually replace this one here with that method. Okay, so I think I can see a bug in children because thinking about a section, and maybe I should just revisit this when we get to the section editing. But so this I think is going to get all children and grandchildren and descendants. In fact, I'm going to rename it descendants. And then I'll go ahead and write a different one for children. So child identifier is coming from the content hierarchy. If I want to go one level further down, I can go back to the content hierarchy and pass the child identifier into that. So if I'm editing a section, then all of its children are paragraphs. So paragraph ID should not be nil. So this query is also going to scoop up citations because their paragraph ID is not nil, and they match all these other content attributes. If I want to get paragraphs but not citations, then the grandchildren ID should be nil. So I can say descendants where content hierarchy for child identifier, thus being the grandchild identifier, is nil. Okay, so let's see if that works. I'll jump into the console. I will take a look at some table of contents data. And I'll grab this entry for chapter 6, inclusion in edition 1. So the children should be this section, and the descendants should also include these 8 paragraphs. So this is record number 55. So TOC equals table of content dot find 55. TOC dot children. Okay, that is just one. TOC dot descendants. It's a relation that only includes the same. Okay, so these are giving me the same results. Okay. All right, so I am going to try converting. Okay, so children was right, descendants was wrong, basically. Oh, right, because the nil, okay. So the nil that was indicated by this child level query was also a part of this, the attributes that were already coming in from the thing itself. So I'll go ahead, put that back on there. So to get descendants, I'll have to exclude multiple attributes from this hash. And I can kind of move this logically below this one. Okay. I don't know how this happened here. So what I'm going to do is walk through this hash until I don't get anything back. So I'm going to start with identifiers equals child identifier. And then while content hierarchy has an entry for identifiers.last. Identifiers should get that. Okay. So I'll go ahead and break this out and say descendant identifiers. Reload. TOC. Okay. I think this may be a case where I simply need to create a return value. Okay. So that's correctly identified the 3 descendant identifiers for a TOC that is placing a chapter. And then I can say descendants. Self.class.where content attributes except descendant identifiers. Reload this, load that up, toc.descendants. Okay. toc.descendants.toSQL. Okay. Okay, so these null constraints are still being put into the query. Let me walk through this a little bit more directly. So I'll start by calling this method content attributes. I kind of know what those are going to be. toc.descendant identifiers. Okay. So except, oh, okay. This is a subtle difference. So descendant identifiers is an array. And the three things in the array are not being pulled out of the array to be compared to the keys in this hash. I can use the splat operator to pull them out. And now I get what looks to be the correct amount of data. It's 10 elements long. Okay, so that is actually including the original. So this first one that has a nil section ID is the TOC that we pulled out of the database. So this method is not including just its descendants, but also itself. So I could just subtract it out of there. It should work, I think. The only bummer with doing this is that this is no longer a scope, so it's going to be less chainable. If we call additional methods after that, they would require additional queries. So I actually can make it into a scope where not ID is ID. So I can take the actual primary key of the record and now the length is only 9. So that is going to be just including its descendants. Cool. So we got there. So descendants is what I can use for this query. And then this one is going to remain the same. And this is, okay, that's an interesting factor here, grabbing the section ID. So there's a little distinction in terminology here. Normally I name parameters like this, and this is the Rails convention. Some of my parameters are coming in named like this, and I think that's basically just an artifact of the... I think I didn't quite get the API right for some of the form helpers that I used to make this form. This section, the section that this paragraph in, is already defined by the section that the TOC is in. So I could just say table of contents, that section. Oh, except that this is a group. So I could just say table of contents, that first, that section. Okay, so going back to the template. So I'm going to be editing the link. I'm going to be editing the code that creates this link. By the way, this is what it does. It makes a little form here where I can edit the paragraph. that link is being generated right here. And what I'm going to do is replace all these IDs with a table of content ID. That edit link is going to lead to this so I'm going to say table, basically the same line of code as here. Okay, then what I do is I grab a section, I hang these three other objects off of it, and I grab a paragraph. So let's take a look at the edit form that comes out of this. So paragraphs edit.js, it renders a paragraph form using the section in the paragraph as its argument. So I'm looking at the paragraph helper, and here's the paragraph form. Okay. So these IDs can come out. However, we're going to replace them with a table of contents ID. And yeah, you can see here that I was talking about how I used the API a little bit incorrectly. I wrote section and then ID, but that didn't result in the, that's not quite the right way to put the arguments into this particular form helper. There's a few differences between the different ones. So I'll just replace this with table of content ID. I'll put a nil in for this value. And cut these other things. Go back to the controller. Get rid of the section. Go to the JavaScript template and change this call site around so I'm passing in the right variable. I'll take another quick look. Okay, so the DOM ID was based on the section. I can get that from the table of content. It's no problem. And this was also coming from the section, so I can get that. I mean, so section.paragraphs.new, what was that doing? It was, I guess it was giving it a section ID? That might have actually been, let's take a look at the section class to see how it relates to paragraph. As many paragraphs for a table of contents, okay. So I don't think that hanging the paragraph off of a section like this is actually going to achieve anything. So I'm just going to go ahead and make a capital P paragraph so that if a paragraph isn't passed into the form, then it will just create a form with a new one. And so that form is going to pass a table of content ID. I guess first let's go ahead and see if this form can be rendered. Okay, so far it looks pretty good. Take a look at the markup it generated, and we do have a hidden field with table of content ID and a value. So I know that that is going to be submitted to this. So find similar to this, and then we'll grab all of its descendants. Okay, then going through to the update action that takes place after the update is saved. Preview of what's going to happen here. So it looks for the place where you're appending a paragraph to section and replaces that with paragraph control. Okay. Exist until after rotation. Okay, so it looks like we got gummed up somewhere. Undefined method section for nil. And that was on line 51 of the controller. Okay. Okay, so this paragraph had no descendants. It had okay. And in the case of this query, I actually missed the mark again. So when I initially wrote this method, it grabbed all of its descendants and itself. I rewrote it so that it would not grab itself by adding that. But what I actually needed was to include itself, at least for that particular logic that I needed there. So I'm going to rename this. I could call it like family, nuclear family, but I don't want to go too haywire with this metaphor. So contained so I described these items as containers. Like a section contains paragraphs and citations. So I'll say contained. It contains itself and its descendants. And then I can go ahead contained where not ID is my ID. Okay, so I'll rewrite the paragraphs controller to use contained. Reload this thing. Try editing this. Okay, so the edit took hold. It was placed in the right place. If I refresh the page, it persists. I can edit it again to correct the punctuation. And okay, so there is another thing to update. This helper method, paragraph form, is also used in another place. it is also used when I want to append a paragraph to a section. And so that's a situation where I don't have a table of content ID to work with, or at least not a paragraph one. I would have a section table of content ID to work with. And let's see. For the purposes of this logic, that table of content would suffice. But for the purposes of this logic, I don't think it would. On the other hand, this form is actually going to be directed to a different controller action. So let's take a look. So a form from this helper, it can either be a new create form or it can be an edit update form. And based on whether this thing has already been saved, it knows whether it's creating or updating. So when I pass it a thing that is not saved, the form orients itself so that it will be directed here. And here, I was utilizing these parameters to create a table of content via this method on the paragraph model, locate. So it grabs all of these associated objects and puts them into these adder accessors. And then table of content has a before create action, which grabs those data from the object that has been associated to it. Okay. So I could rewrite locate so that it grabs all of these IDs from a table of content. Not sure if I really need that extra step since I have all these IDs. Let's think. So the paragraph controller, when I create one, if I have the section table of content IDs, I can take those same ones and add a paragraph ID. This before filter could still run, it just simply wouldn't really be doing anything because it would already have these data, so it wouldn't even go past these conditionals. let's see what this looks like. Table of content equals this good old thing. And the section come from this. The section is still important for the logic that happens after the create, which is that stuff gets appended to it. And instead of calling locate, I could just say table of content dot create, table of content dot attributes dot merge paragraph ID is paragraph.id. I would need to accept, okay, rather than all the attributes, I'm just going to take the, what did I call it, content attributes? Yeah, content attributes. And then the table of content will take care of sequencing it so that it can figure out how many paragraphs are already in that section and add one so that it comes in at the end. Okay, so this looks like it could work. So rewinding for a moment and looking at append. I actually want to look at the append file from the sections views. Okay, so this is passing this section into the paragraph form. What I want to do instead is pass in a table of content that identifies that section. And I believe I've already updated the form to handle that. So let's see how I can pass that table of content ID to the form. So looking at this edit template, focus append on is the helper that generates that link. Okay. So focus append on doesn't create a link. It creates a div with an image. Then there is this script which finds those divs and generates these links with all this data. Okay, so this is something that touches many different I can't refactor this quite yet because that method is being used here, it's being used here, and it's being used here to add a section. All I want to use it for right at this very moment is changing how I add a paragraph. So I'm going to use a different method. I want it to be styled similarly, but instead of having this class, because I don't want that script to attach, I'm going to make it a link. Okay. So I want it to go to, okay, so the first thing, okay. Looking at my roots that contain the word append, append paragraph path, append section path. Okay, so I want the append section path, and that is going to give me the logic for appending a paragraph to the section. So table of content dot content identifier. Oh, content. Class dot name dot underscore. I'm going to turn this into a string. And I'm going to put the word append on the front of it. Then I'm going to send that as a method name to my app so that it generates that path for me. Then I'm going to wrap this whole div in that link. Then I'm going to go back into this template and replace just this one instance of append, focus append on with append to. And then I need to give append to a table of content ID. So the second argument to send is the arguments that I pass to the method. Table of content dot ID. And then when I call this, I'll pass that in there. Okay. Okay, so when I copied that code, I didn't edit the way that this was pluralized. Okay, and so now my CSS for this is not landing. Let's take a look at the rule that gets us here. It's on line 17 of books.css. Okay, and I can see that it's hanging off this class name focus tool. So I'll give this a class name as well. I'll just call it new focus tool. So hopefully in a couple hours they will all be using this one, and I can give it a better name. And that was on books.scss. Okay. And right, okay, so it's no longer saying section, it's saying, I can fix that real quick. Table of content, dot content. Add to section. And that, if you look at the bottom, you can see there's a link to section/27/append with a table of content ID. Okay, so looking at the sections controller, what's going to happen when we click that link? Well, it wants to grab all these objects, and then it's going to render this file. And basically, we want section for this purposes so that the form goes in the right place. But here we want to replace this with a table of content. So looking at this link, it's giving us a section ID and a table of content ID. So we're basically going to replace this with table of content, and then we're going to replace this with table of content ID and see if that works. Okay. Okay, so it's saying it's missing a template for HTML. So let's just make our link specify that it should be JS. Or rather, could I just do remote is true? I'll try that again instead. Okay. So it rendered sections append. Let's see what happened with our thing here. Okay. Section 27.append. This looks like a paragraph form. Let's see if this is on the page. It's not. Section 27. Let's see what this one is called. section 70. Chapter 27. Okay. So we missed the section ID for the chapter ID. So looking at the sections controller, okay, so the error goes back to there. So when we're generating the link here in the books helper, append section path. So the first argument to this actually needs to be the section. So table of content dot content. Okay, so this link now is pointing to section 70. And here is our edit box. Purchasing collections is profitable, but a lot of work, and you need to know what you're doing. Okay, so far looks okay, and it's stuck. So that is what I wanted to see. Okay, so taking a quick review of the paragraphs controller. Create has been redone. Delay has been redone. Promote has been redone. Update, edit, destroy have been redone. And append can be redone when I bring the rest of this refactor to bear on the interface that deals with citations. So we can just review our code here. Changes to the controller that I just showed. Changes to the sections controller. Our new helper to create the link. Change to the form that we use to create and edit paragraphs. New classes on the table of new methods in the table of content class. Change to the link for editing and the link for appending. And then these scripts that render that form got changed. So that's 9 files we changed in this refactor. Okay, so that one I definitely whirled through a lot more code, and gonna probably keep going with this. Perhaps I'll film it so that we can get some more reps and you guys can get another chance to see what happened, so you can understand more of the framework. But it's going to be also a lot of, well, might not be copy and pasting really, but I guess that is the fun part, right? When I get to delete code and replace it with something less verbose. So I'll make another video to show that to you guys. And always remember to tell your friends about wayswemage.com. You know, magic is one of the most fun things in the lives of millions of Americans, millions of people around the world. And your friends and family can be next. So, the book is just $2, less than a cup of coffee. Seriously, people. wayswemage.com. Thanks a lot.